Have you ever wandered through the kitchen, checked the pantry, then the fridge, lowered your expectations and returned to the pantry, settled on the idea of some peanut butter toast, opened a drawer to fetch a butter knife, found that the knives were all dirty, turned to a sink full of dishes and thought to yourself, I have a few minutes, I could wash some of these. You reached for the dishcloth and suddenly it happened. Your mom or partner hollered from the other room, hey, could you wash the dishes? And the tiny flicker of motivation you had disappeared. Self-determination theory is not technically a description of how someone learns, but rather how they are motivated to learn. Its developers, Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan, call it an organismic theory, as opposed to behavioral, cognitive, or constructive, that, quote, assumes people are inherently prone toward learning, mastery, and connection with others, end quote. Supposedly, self-determination theory is built on several assumptions about human motivation, but most of the peer-reviewed content seems to be behind a paywall. What's available to the general public, though, is its three central tenets: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is ownership of one's actions, the ability to make choices. Autonomy can be supported by experiences of interest and value. Competence is the feeling of mastery, intrinsic pride in one's accomplishments, supported by challenge, positive feedback, and growth opportunities. Relatedness is a sense of belonging and connection and is supported by respect and caring. How well a learning experience supports these tenets places the learner's motivation on a scale from amotivated through a wide range of externally motivated to the pinnacle goal of intrinsically motivated. All three tenets are undermined by external control, punishment, and even rewards in most cases. Self-determination theory is most relevant to instructional design in identifying barriers to learning and designing effective feedback. For example, Dacey and Ryan explained that feedback with informational significance that supports a learner's competence, here's how this affects that, has been demonstrated to be more effective than control significance, which has to do with the learner's behavior. You did this part wrong. Ryan and Dacey started working on self-determination theory in the early 1980s as a counterpoint to B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, which holds that behavior is dictated by external forces. Though self-determination theory has yet to be picked up by mainstream instructional design theorists, it rounds out some more popular ID tools, such as Keller's ARCS model to validate the importance of a learner's confidence and feelings of success, and Knowles' theory of andragogy to better explain a learner's self-concept, experiences, and motivation. A reason self-determination theory may not be widely popular yet is that it can be difficult to incorporate self-determination into a learning experience. In classrooms, teachers are likely working with several learners at once, and crafting the lesson to each student's intrinsic motivators is next to impossible. In professional settings, a learner's motivation to learn takes a backseat to the need for performance improvement. From a leadership perspective, it may not matter whether a worker wants to learn, they simply have to. Niemiec and Ryan point out that, quote, the pressure towards specified outcomes promotes teachers' reliance on extrinsically focused strategies that crowd out more effective, interesting, and inspiring teaching practices, end quote. That is, when teachers or instructional designers don't feel like their autonomy is respected, they have a difficult time considering their learners' autonomy. There are two ways self-determination theory addresses this gap in instructional design. First, understanding what motivation looks like objectively, not through our own circumstances, is the first step to improving the motivational strategies in our design. Self-determination theory's explanation of how autonomy, competence, and relatedness all impact a learner's ability to interact with the material helps us as designers to identify problem areas that undermine our learners' motivation. Second, it's important to realize that no theory is all or nothing. Self-determination theory is a descriptive theory, not a prescriptive theory, but we can examine our decisions through a self-determination lens, and even if we can't completely tailor the experience to each individual learner, we can still use self-determination theory to improve our learners' chances of engaging with the material in productive ways. My own experience with self-determination theory leans into this idea of a little is better than nothing. My primary role at work is transitioning facilitated trainings to e-learning, and though the primary business case is to free up the trainer's time so they can focus on more robust training, I like to think that e-learning incorporates self-determination theory in a few natural ways. First, autonomy. The e-learning courses are still required training that are assigned at regular intervals and take away some of the learner's freedom in whether or not to learn the content. But when compared to a facilitated session, learners are able to choose when to take the e-learning, how long or short of time to spend on the material as opposed to a set 30-minute or hour-long training session. And the courses are also freely available in the LMS without needing to be assigned, so people can take these trainings as they're curious, not only when they're required to do so. Competence is something I get to work a lot into my e-learning content because I use Articulate Storyline to create software training. The learners are able to see immediately how the lesson material applies to their job because of the sandbox-like experience of actually practicing the steps. I try to use these experiences as the graded section as much as possible, rather than a test that has more to do with reading comprehension. Finally, relatedness. This is the hardest part of developing e-learning because I'm taking away that face-to-face, get your questions answered right away kind of atmosphere. Stone, Daisy, and Ryan write about asking open-ended questions and practicing active listening to foster relatedness in training situations, but this just doesn't work when there's no one to ask the questions or listen. Going back to the a little is better than nothing idea, I have to trust the work environment itself to fill in that gap of relatedness. Luckily, my workplace does a pretty good job of cultivating an encouraging, connected culture. And that's self-determination theory. Here are the sources I used to create this presentation. If you'd like to learn more about self-determination theory, I recommend starting with Ryan and Daisy's article on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. This is one of the few comprehensive self-determination theory papers free for the general public from the theory's creators themselves. Next, Niemiec and Ryan have a great article on how self-determination theory applies to learning. And finally, if you work in training rather than traditional education, Stone, Daisy, and Ryan have this article that branches into prescriptive theory, how to use self-determination theory to create healthy, motivational workplaces. I hope you learn great and interesting things. Thank you for listening.